Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Knowledge Cast, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of knowledge management, information management, data management, and really everything in between. I'm your host, Joe Hilger, co-founder and COO of Enterprise Knowledge, and today we're shining our spotlight on Lasse Andresen and his company IndyKite. In our tech spotlights, we get up close and personal with the leaders behind the products and technologies revolutionizing how we tackle KM challenges. Lasse is one of them. Lasse and his team have developed an exciting new product that uses graphs as a digital twin to model and enforce content and data security. Lasse, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little more about your product and how it actually delivers security.
Absolutely. I would love to. This AI world, kind of like a lot of issues has kind of like surfaced suddenly. Kind of like everybody has enough data, but okay, where is it? Can I use it? Can I trust it? Can I share it? This kind of like, it's a lot of good questions, and our product's actually in there to actually have this control layer. We are using graph to making sure that we can understand the context, the relationships, and also be very, very dynamic, which is a really good feature with the graph technologies.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, when we first met you all and started to hear about your product, we came to this when we had multiple clients trying to use AI, and they kept having to say, we can only go so far because that other content isn't properly secured, right? It was just stuck. And we were like, well, we have to find a way to solve this. And no one could. And of course, we're graph people too. But wow, 5 minutes into a conversation, I was like, you all are the ones, you get it.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of like, I don't know, the big enterprises finally, I call it sober up or reality kind of like finally surfaced. They always had a problem during to all the data all over the place, but kind of like, I think it's surfaced much faster now because, okay, I'm going to use AI. I'm going to use AI agent. What do they need? Yes, they need access to all sorts of data. They need it in real time. And what about governance? How do you actually control this? How do you make sure that kind of like think about an AI agent without context? That'd be hilarious.
It's so critical. And the challenge is hard. I remember I was at a security conference speaking with two different chief security officers. Their comment was like, oh, yeah, we know that's a problem, but it's not a big deal. Now, that was about 6 or 8 months ago. And last day, I think things are changing fast, aren't they?
And also the other thing is, of course, if you're looking on large enterprises today, kind of like the infrastructure they have on the identity side is not built for this at all. It was kind of like built for humans. It was like role-based access control. Joe and Mary, they are kind of like in sales department. They should have access to this. And maybe kind of like 2 years after they are moving to another department and they have different access rights. That's not how the world is anymore. And of course, there's both humans and there are agents that are kind of like doing stuff on behalf of humans. How do you dynamically control this, secure it, and making sure that the right agent on behalf of the right person giving access to the right data and get the value out of the data? This is not only talking about kind of like being a gatekeeper. You also need to provide the data to get value out of it, operationalize it.
Absolutely. And I think two thoughts here. First, you mentioned how AI has changed it. One of the big security analysts wrote an article recently that said AI is the new middleware. And what's happened is, in my mind, we used to be able to secure things by application. You could get in or out of the application. Those barriers are gone. Absolutely.
They're definitely gonna, and also human being can sit there and kind of like manually start one application and then look into another application and get little bits of data from different sources doing that controlled. And that's not how an agent actually works. So it is everything is totally flipped, kind of like the need for dynamic security in real time. It can't be static anymore. So when I see people talking about role-based access control in 2026, something is seriously wrong.
Absolutely. And this is really where graph comes into play. So what used to be, and for those listening, you'll think of SharePoint or any of these tools, these people have access to this area based on a role or based on being put in or out of a group. And within an application, you could do an okay job at it. But as you start to look across the landscape of the company, now all of a sudden you're looking to do rules. Here's the logic. And the system has to understand all the other systems. And to me, that's where graph comes into play. Graph is that map. I think you call it a digital twin, right?
Absolutely, kind of like yes, semantic digital twin. You kind of like you model kind of like your business, your workflow, kind of like, and create kind of like a semantic digital twin of whatever you're trying to do, all your relationship, and only graph can do that. Think about Excel with columns or kind of like LDAP schemas, like hierarchical schemas. The world is not constructed that way. We all have relationships come and go. I'm happily married, so I don't think I'm going to go away. So maybe you can have role-based access control to my wife. But except for that, it is definitely need to be more dynamic. And also, kind of some data points are kind of dependent on, again, on the context. Even if you own a drone, and you should have all the rights to do whatever you want, should you actually be allowed to kind of like start flying on every airport, or is actually location something you also need to take into consideration when you are doing a decision, or the agent is trying to do it for you?
Yeah, I think for us personally, as we apply security, we do projects for clients. That project information can be in a project management tool. It can exist in either SharePoint or Google Enterprise if you're using each of those. There can be an AWS workspace, etc. All of these things are talking about the same project. And we need to understand the relationship from the project to each of these different tools and products in one place. And wow, doesn't a graph do that well?
It definitely do it really, really well, and that whole dynamic aspect of, because kind of like things are changing all the time, and think about kind of like your partner network, your ecosystem. Kind of like maybe there's a temporary access for an agent or whatever, kind of like just in a specific time or under a specific location or whatever. It really needs something like a graph. And graph technology has been around for a while, but I think finally people understanding the advantage of using it. We have been doing a lot of education, but finding out people that say, this is what it does, this is what it gives me, which is really nice.
Yeah. And you just said something important because there still is a need for education. I think there's a lot of people out there, especially in the security space, that haven't figured it out. Explain to our listeners how you teach these people why they need a graph and why your solution is different.
First of all, I think it's really important to start small, kind of like get a use case value, showcase something really, really fast. Because kind of even if your workload or whatever is growing, you can add that later on. You don't have to model the whole world up front. That again is kind of like a big business, kind of like pro and opportunity. So we start really small. We only kind of like map together the data sources, the rules that we actually need to provide a specific task. Soon as that is done, you can provide value. Then people are starting to understand it. And the nice thing is, if something change in the back, you don't have to change the agent or the front end application, because when you're querying the graph, you probably get a different answer. All that logic that in the old days, like authorization, all the application out there, they were basically building authorization inside the business logic. And if something changes, you need to rewrite your application. And now we can externalize this in a much nicer way. And I think another thing which is we really are educating our customer is that the graph doesn't need to have all the data in the graph. A node in a graph can be a reference point to external data, to an API, to whatever, and grab it. Because I really believe that very often is the freshest, correct copy of your data is closest to the application. So if you are starting copying and everything, ETL, and spend 7 years of building the biggest data lake you're going to fail. Why don't you connect to the data where it is? The graph understand the context, the relationships, and they can go out and grab information as needed. And that's also a big thing around using graphs.
This should be a really familiar concept to all of our listeners who have been following the semantic layer that we've talked about for a while. We've really pushed the idea that your data lakes, your data warehouses, those are independent data sets, likely captured in the format that fit entry. Now, all of a sudden, what we're doing is we're mapping things. And that's what the graph is. It's that map that's repeatable and you don't move data, et cetera. So we started doing this to make data findable and reportable. And now 3 or 4 years later, you're coming to us saying, hey, by the way, EK, do this to make your security work. And it's probably the same thing. Wow, light bulbs for us.
It actually is. If you kind of like look on it, think about the coin, kind of like security and data is kind of like the two sides of the same coin. You can't have an AI strategy without a data strategy, and you can't have an AI strategy without security. And you need both at the same time. We're having a lot of fun these days.
I bet. And, again, for our listeners who are saying, wow, this is quite an investment, here's the neat thing. Because this is the same problem, you can solve it the same way. The graph helps you identify how information should be aggregated and pulled together. And it also is the layer that helps the security agent that Lasse's team at IndyKite brings so that can make the right choices. And so all of a sudden, what sounds like, wow, that's a big investment is likely solving two of the biggest information management problems you have as an organization.
And the other thing, kind of like even if you're a non-technical person, you can suddenly kind of understand by looking on the graph how the different data pieces are connected. It's a visual thing, and it's like real life. Kind of you can actually see it instead of kind of like put your head into Excel spreadsheet and try to figure out what these kind of like all these kind of cells and columns actually mean. That also is a good aspect of graph for non-technical users.
Yeah. So, in the same way data needs context, so does security.
Oh, yes.
To jump on a hot topic these days.
And of course, you can go really, really fine grained. Kind of like you can have security rules saying, kind of like, I don't want to give access to this because the quality of the data that I'm getting in is not good enough. I can't trust the data that I'm trying to use because kind of like you can have level of assurance on the data. Where did it come from? Is this blood sample from a monkey or from a 9-year-old boy? I don't know. But what you should definitely know if kind of like that you should probably not give access to a doctor to kind of like the blood sample to a monkey, at least if you're gonna try to figure out what's wrong with your mother.
Absolutely. I'll say I was talking to a chief data officer at a very large multinational engineering consultancy, and they said they started applying graph to their data. And the first thing it showed them was how bad their data was. In the information silos they had, it all looked fine. Once they could connect it, it was shocking. And security is likely the same way. Hey, we think it's all okay here, but the rules in one system don't match to the rules in the other system and don't match what you're really doing. Because security to me is a policy. My client says only the people working on the project can see the data. That's the policy. It's not about a bunch of, users and groups and role-based access. That's the rule. Do it across every system. That's all they want, right?
Absolutely. And kind of like people come and go. How are you keeping track of kind of like all these roles in a world like that? And of course, big enterprises, yeah, they have a lot of customers, a lot of employees. Then you're gonna add 1,000 agents into this. How are you going to control that? How are you going to govern it? How can you trust your workflow? It's all good questions. There's definitely also our solutions, and the knowledge graph or a context graph, depending on how you want to look at it. It's kind of like a little bit of the same. It's definitely a technology that helps to solve these problems.
Yeah, and I'll say from what I can tell, you're really the first to market with this idea.
I think so. And it was and honestly, when I first started the company, half of the engineers coming from the data management, kind of a data scientist side of the skills, and other people are cybersecurity identity guys. And yeah, it not only is data in silos, but sometimes kind of like your knowledge is between engineers are also in silos. So it took some time that they actually started communicating to each other. Yeah, you saw light bulbs go off and kind of, oh yeah, of course. It's we want the data. That's where the value is. This is what we want to operationalize, and you have really need to have strict security around it, like for compliance. GDPR in Europe, of course, are extremely strong. Heavily regulated businesses, like for instance in banking, you can't just kind of like your agentic enterprise go wild without controlling these kind of things. And you need to understand both sides, the security side and the data side, data lineage, kind of like level of assurance. And also the other thing I think is extremely important. All the enterprises out there already have an existing infrastructure, and rip and replace will never fly. So you need to have something that kind of like talks to an existing infrastructure. Look on authentication of humans, which also are definitely in the workflow. Everybody on the planet has Microsoft or Google or kind of like my old company, ForgeRock, and it works. And they have kind of already onboarded their customers, the employees into the system for one simple thing, the authentication. Okay, so let's leverage that where it is and kind of like bring value to the system afterwards. So you need to have technology that actually can provide new value into an existing legacy of a lot of data, a lot of silos, existing security systems at the same time. And I think that's extremely important. I have never met an enterprise to say, I have too little data. And I have never met an enterprise that say, oh, it's a greenfield. Let's start from scratch. Let's just stop this bank for a year and build it from scratch again. You need to kind of like figure out how you integrate with existing infrastructure and leveraging that information and then added more value on the top. So we call it kind of like a horizontal control layer that sits kind of like above all your data sources, connects to them, make all the security decisions before actually data is served out to an application, to an AI agent, or whatever is requesting it.
KnowledgeCast is brought to you by Enterprise Knowledge, the world's largest dedicated knowledge management consultancy. From training to benchmarks, strategy, design, prototyping, and all the way to enterprise-level implementations, Enterprise Knowledge wants to be your services partner, spanning the fields of knowledge management, knowledge graphs, data, learning, advanced content management, and enterprise artificial intelligence. Contact us at info@enterprise-knowledge.com to discuss how we can support you.
This is important, and I'm glad you just described this. For our listeners, you've already got a mess of security tools and data, et cetera. Usually that's why they've called us or why you're interested in what we have to say. The fact that your system can just sit on top, you don't have to rip anything out. It can become the control panel that guides this. To me, it makes the adoption and really the rollout easier. Would you agree?
It makes it easier and also makes you get return on investment really fast. Again, start small, fix something, but you have an architecture, a layer that is consistent. And if you have third party people kind of like making new applications or new agents, you can tell them this is how this is going to plug in. Don't put a lot of authorization kind of like policies into your app. We're going to provide that. Think about consent services. That should be kind of like a central service that is provided by a graph. We see companies now that has an audit and they have kind of like 7 people from EY or somebody coming in and take up your boardroom for 3 months and sitting there with a spreadsheet and trying to collect logs for figure out if for doing an audit and you're compliant. When they're done, all the data have changed anyway. So it doesn't make sense. So things like consent stuff also is a perfect thing to keep in the graph, keep it as a central service that all new applications and agents can actually use. And then if you want an audit, here it is.
Yeah, Lasse, I love this. So we've got clients who are mid-flight on their AI initiatives, and they're paused for some data because they don't trust the security. And what you're saying is you can keep going. Plug this in, it becomes the intermediary that filters out stuff people shouldn't see, and you don't have to go backwards.
The keyword here is trust. And you think about, where does trust actually start? it starts with the identity. How can you securely identify a human being, a sensor, or kind of like a car? Everything have an identity. And if you know what the source is of that data, you can actually trust it. So data comes kind of like almost with like a birth certificate. Is Sensors are sending kind of data. If you can trust that this was the sensor that sent this piece of data, you can trust the data, and that you can then use it. Or this data came from a human being that are strongly authenticated. Again, the level of assurance for the data that's provided afterwards have a higher quality and can be trusted, will be fundamental to if you actually can trust the workflow which is happening afterward.
So powerful. So taking this back one more time for the people watching this, role-based access, old school. If your security team is telling you this, you're in trouble.
Definitely.
There you go. And then your solution, because it uses a graph, because it understands context, and because it doesn't have to be invasive to the other systems, it can be plopped in on top and can be that filter protecting this. So for projects that are midstream that are saying, I don't want to have to go backwards, what you're saying is don't. You can carry it forward. And then just recognizing the importance of being able to visualize what you're securing and what's there. And the fact that the whole way that you begin to understand your whole data ecosystem is the same way you apply the security to it suddenly makes a lot of sense.
Now, of course, when you query the graph, you're getting back what you ask for, and kind of like how many steps you would like to go into graph. You're not kind of like checking the whole world every time. So it actually scales, and you can kind of like, you don't have to model everything up front. You can add stuff, and depending on the use case, on what you're trying to do, kind of like you can still use the context, and you don't have to start from scratch.
That's wonderful. Lasse, you're a very modest person, but I want our listeners to know your background and why they should listen to you when you talk about security. Do you mind telling us about Ford Rock and really how you started? It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was definitely a good ride, so to speak, and kind of like started back in the heydays. Then everybody would like to take their services online. Kind of like all sorts of banks want to have to serve their customer through online appearance, e-commerce, and all of these things. A lot of efforts going on in that stuff. And I used to work for a company called Sun Microsystems, but somebody maybe remember them. And as Scott used to say, it's change computing forever. But we were really into open source, and also into driving open standards, and kind of like things like SAML, or kind of like OAuth, or what OpenID is doing now, is fundamental for interactions on the internet. Standards will always win because it gets adoption, and more people are using it. So I started this from scratch. True story, it was me, a gin tonic or two. Tonic is really good because you never got malaria. Started thinking about how we could actually, and Oracle came along and wired Sun. That was something that I didn't want to do for many reasons. And we figured out how can we actually take this forward. There's a lot of investments already. The cool thing with open source is even if somebody buys you or acquires you or trying to do something, the technology still lives. Knew a lot of really great talent that had developed the technology, and took this basically from a very lonely evening up to probably 850 employees at the moment. If you look on customers, it was everything from Verizon to AT&T to BBC to Capital One to Audi and BMW and all the big enterprises. And then got it to a little IPO when close to a $3 billion exit, and got bored, wanted to do it again, and started IndyKite.
Yes, absolutely. So for our listeners, you're hearing someone that has been on the leading edge of security and technology for many, many years and is truly a thought leader in the industry. And Lasse, this is important because the people we talk to aren't security first. They tend to be from the data and knowledge and information side. So to hear that you've built one of the largest data software exits ever, and now you've said, here's a new problem and I'm going to solve it, that I hope for those of listening This is someone who gets it and gets it at enterprise scale.
Thank you very much. And again, the combination of data and security, it is kind of like the two sides of the same coin. And security is kind of there for securing things, data for creating value, be able to operationalize it and use it. And that's where you will have great customer experiences and great business value.
Wonderful. And I always ask this towards the end of our sessions, but what's next? What's the next big challenge that people aren't thinking about, that our listeners should say, oh, wow, this is coming around the corner?
I think that, first of all, I think what you will see is that now specifically AI is very kind of like helping us in our daily life. Code faster or kind of like do something faster or make an image or stuff are now kind of like a really, really good helper to do things better and faster. I think AI will also go to the next step and not only be a tool for us, it actually also will do the job. And when you get into autonomous agents, then definitely there's bigger challenges than, at least now, for most of the project that I see in agentic AI, the humans are still involved in the process. But now you have driverless cars in San Francisco. People were laughing about that kind of like 5 years ago, will never happen. I think the next step and challenge here is when AI and AI agents can get autonomous and they are connecting to all those different data sources and starting to communicate in a way you didn't believe now. So a lot of good challenges for both of us.
Absolutely. With that, Lasse, is there anything we didn't cover that you want to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. And life is definitely not boring. I'm born curious. There's so much cool stuff that is happening every day. And it's a pleasure to working with Enterprise Knowledge. You guys really know what you're doing. So thank you for partnering up with us. Really looking forward to the future.
I'll say thank you so much. We're just as excited about this partnership. And for our listeners, thank you for listening to this special episode of Knowledge Cast. Once again, I'd like to thank Lasse for joining us. You really got to hear an expert who understands this space, and I hope you all take a lot from it. To check out more information on knowledge management systems, and everything else, visit our website at enterprise-knowledge.com. Thanks again, everyone.